Hello, hello! Welcome to the second segment of Global Conflicts Unveiled with Bea.
And Jody. Hello, guys.
Okay, so before we dive into today's stories, let's recap the first segment with Sam and Regine. So they explored the causes of civil wars, highlighting the Lebanese civil war where religion was a key factor.
Yes, and you know what? In Lebanon, divisions between Christian and Muslim communities tied to power and then of identity, fueled with decades of violence, sadly. Religion, while it could be a source for unity for many, can also become truly a dividing line when used to justify conflict and inequality.
Yeah, and the Lebanese civil war reminds us that religious differences aren't the problem. It's how they're politicized. The Taif Agreement, which ended the war, the Lebanese Civil War, shows the importance of dialogue and coexistence in healing divided societies. So, what is your opinion about the Taif Agreement?
So my opinion of that is, although it's quite challenging to attain, but with its accomplishment already, has brought surely into peace and then accordance to the place and has unified people into the safe community that it should be.
Yeah, right. And the document called for national unity, peace among the fighting groups, and rebuilding the country's government and institutions. So it took a lot of time, but at least the war has ended with the use of this agreement.
Yes, and apart from that, as we move forward, let's reflect on how religion can truly be a bridge for peace when we focus on shared values like compassion and justice, not just here, but of course for every single part of the world.
Yeah, so much with that. Now that we already know the causes of civil war, let's shift our focus from the broad causes to the human stories. So, civil wars and internal conflicts aren't just events we read about in history books. They deeply affect individuals, their families, and communities. Behind every statistics gathered after wars, there is a face, a name, and a story of survival, resilience, and loss.
Absolutely. And with that, one of the most tragic aspects of conflicts is the involvement of children. So can you imagine, like around the world, armed groups have used children as combatants, as spies, or even laborers of such groups. While Sierra Leone's civil war from 1991 to 2002 is an infamous example for its use of child soldiers. And then thousands of children were forcibly recruited into groups, not only as fighters but also as porters or slaves even. And then these children robbed from their innocence where they should be at school learning new things rather than having weapons on their hands for war.
Yeah, and the experience of these children is heartbreaking. They were taken from their families, forced to fight, and exposed to violence no child should ever face. Many lived in constant fear and carried deep emotional scars. Let's think on the positive side. Well, despite this, some found hope and healing through rehabilitation programs showing incredible strength. Their stories remind us why children must be protected from the horrors of war.
Of course, and then apart from that, there was a story of Ishmael Bea, a former child soldier from Sierra Leone, as I said earlier. It's both heartbreaking and then inspiring at the same time because after years of fighting, and then he was rescued by the UNICEF and then later shared his story with the world through his memoir, which is very interesting. A Long Way Gone, his journey from violence to healing is the testament of resilience of the human spirit that everything can truly be surmountable.
Yeah, but what is UNICEF, by the way?
Oh, I'm so sorry. UNICEF is defined as the United Nations Children's Fund. And then it is an organization dedicated to providing humanitarian aid and supporting the rights of children worldwide, particularly in areas such as education, healthcare, and then protection from violence and exploitation. So UNICEF works over 190 countries globally, especially in crisis situations like war, poverty, and then diseases. And have also witnessed that UNICEF was highly functioning and progressively working in countries like South Africa. Yes.
Well, it is so nice to have organizations that can assess children,
Yes.
especially during wars, right?
Of
They
course.
become instruments of hope for them.
Exactly.
So, closer to home, the Philippines has its own challenges with children and conflict too. In Mindanao, where decades of armed conflict have raged between government forces and separatist groups, children have been recruited or coerced into joining armed groups. Some have acted as combatants, messengers, or even spies too.
Oh, so I guess there's one example about that. There was this documentary that I once watched. It was about the multi-ISIS group that first started the terrorism dispute in Mindanao. And I have seen that even children underage are early on recruited to join the terrorist group. And it is such a terror to witness that those children were taken away their innocence. You know what, they should be having fun, playing around, learning new things at school, but guess what? They're experiencing all of these horrible things at such a young age.
Yeah, exactly. Their freedom and privileges have taken away as well, which is so sad. Well, you can be inspired of Colon's story. He is a young boy from Maguindanao who escaped recruitment by an armed group. With the help of local NGOs or non-government organizations, he found refuge in a community program that provided education and trauma counseling. Well, today, Kalon is an advocate for children's rights, raising awareness about the dangers of child recruitment in conflict zones.
Oh, yes, exactly. And I have also witnessed that some of the survivors such experience traumatizing things also become refugees of pain and suffering it has caused them. And instead of living in fear, in constant scare, the scar of their past was their reason to keep going. And then some of them even became advocates for humanitarian aid in line with the said organization earlier, which is UNICEF. And then such shows that anything is truly surmountable if you keep going in life and you do not let obstacles get into your way.
Yeah.
And of course, another important perspective also is the role of women in these conflicts. So globally, women have been overlooked as historical accounts, but they play vital roles in both peace building and survival of the people for recovery from those destructions that they have experienced.
Really? Like in what way?
Oh, in a way that I will give you one example. I hope you find it interesting. In Northern Ireland during the Troubles, women were pivotal in peace efforts because organizations like Northern Ireland Women's Coalition brought together women from both Protestants to Catholic communities in working towards reconciliation of their places. So, these women often sees as the backbone of their families and of course their lived-in communities became agents of change by advocating for peace and of course for peace building.
Well, in the Philippines too, women have also been at the forefront of peace building. The Mothers for Peace movement in Mindanao, it is one example. Well, these women, many of whom had lost family members to the conflict, organized dialogues and community programs to bridge divides between Christians and Muslims. Their efforts contributed to the passage of the Bangsamoro Organic Law, a critical step toward peace in the region. Another inspiring figure, do you know Irene Santiago?
I do not know her exactly.
Well, she is a leader in peace negotiations who has worked tirelessly to ensure women's voices are included in the process. And her work shows that sustainable peace is only possible when all voices are heard.
Oh, So, although she's a new name to me, she's very foreign. I've never heard about her before. But you know what? What the work that she does is very interesting, and I'd actually like to know more, especially when women are involved in things like this, because just like this one, it shows women empowerment is surely present even in the adversity times where people are not exactly living the best lives, but they're still surviving and keeping going forward.
Yeah.
So, of course, let us not forget the stories of displacement too. In the Syrian civil war is one of the most devastating examples, with millions of displaced and forced to flee from their homes. So there's a refugee like Malak, a young girl from Aleppo, have shared harrowing stories of survival. So her family fled into Syria and then eventually found safety in a refugee camp in Jordan. So just imagine all those times and the distance they traveled just so they could survive all those wars and they could fight for their lives. And then despite her hardships, her dreams of becoming a doctor and helping others in need is still there.
Yeah, and one thing that I really admire about the survivors is that they set a goal in their minds that is not only for themselves but also for others, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and you have mentioned ISIS earlier, right?
I do.
Well, in the Philippines, the Marawi surge in 2017 serves as a stark reminder of how internal conflict can uproot lives. The siege, a 5-month battle between government forces and ISIS-linked militants,
Yeah.
displaced over 350,000 people, which is so saddening. And to add up, there's one story that stands out is that of Fatima.
Yeah.
Well, a teacher from Marawi. This is an interesting story. Well, when the fighting started, she and her family were forced to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs. So for months, they lived in an evacuation center, relying on aid for survival. So despite these hardships, Fatima continued teaching children in the camp, ensuring they had access to education even in the face of adversity. Her dedication inspired many and highlighted the importance of education during crisis.
So that's one amazing story,
Yeah.
exactly. And although I do not know her as well as her works, but her action was sincerely inspiring, and I could not help but be amazed by the work that she does and such bravery and persistence for despite the challenge, all they face nothing but nothing stopped her from doing her job. It is truly remarkable job of a woman. And then there are also the stories of refugees and displaced individuals, which are not confined to a single country. So globally, organizations like the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or also known as the UNHCR, work tirelessly to provide shelter, food, and then education to millions of displaced individuals, especially the children.
Yeah, so these stories are more than just accounts of suffering. They are testimonies to the resilience of the human spirit. They remind us that while conflict destroys, it also reveals the strength of individuals and communities working to rebuild.
The stories like Ishmael, Kalon, Fatima, and which are mentioned earlier, which reminds us that healing and recovery require more than just rebuilding homes and infrastructures and physical destructions, which are a part of the casualties. And then they require addressing the deep psychological and social wounds left behind by war, such as fears and traumas of the children and then the people too.
Yeah, and these efforts take time. In the case of Mindanao, it took decades of dialogue, trust building, and grassroots efforts to achieve the agreements we see today. But even now, challenges remain in ensuring that peace reaches every corner of the region. And a notable success in post-conflict reconciliation is the Balay Rehabilitation Center, a Philippine organization providing psychosocial support to survivors of torture and conflict. Well, their work with displaced communities and former combatants has helped individuals regain a sense of normalcy and rebuild their lives.
So yeah, that is one such an amazing job of our government. So if we could only keep on doing these things for the people in the marginalized sector, and then of course stop wars and then prevent them from happening, then we can surely rebuild one good community for our people, and then of course for the generations ahead, because they are the most crucial things in our community and for the future of our nation.
Yeah.
So that is all the time for today's episode of Global Conflicts Unveiled. Thank you so much for joining us as we explore humanitarian stories and the stories behind civil wars and the profound cause and the enduring hope for peace.
Until then, let's remember that understanding conflict is the first step toward peace.
Thank you so much.